He says he likes you and then disappears. First he opens up, then suddenly withdraws. One day he's warm and affectionate, the next he's cold as ice. And you're left wondering, is he really falling in love or is he just playing with me? Let me tell you something that might surprise you. Sometimes, when a man is falling in love, he doesn't come closer. He tests you. Do you know that feeling when your heart starts to hope, but your gut warns you something isn't right? When his behavior leaves you emotionally drained, yet you feel more drawn to him than ever before. If you're a woman who has loved deeply, experienced heartbreak, and still believes in the power of genuine connection, then this conversation is for you. Today, we lift the veil, how men test you when they're falling in love, and what these tests reveal about him and about you. There's this one moment, quiet, subtle, invisible to the outside world, when a woman realizes she's being tested. Not a grand, dramatic scene. No, the test is almost intimate. Suddenly, he stops calling, his messages become distant, evasive, and you wonder, did I just imagine the connection? In this emotional vacuum, in this psychologically confusing silence, something primal awakens. Am I safe? Am I even wanted? Or am I being emotionally manipulated again? What many don't understand is this. A man in love doesn't always move toward you. Sometimes he withdraws, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Why? Because love is dangerous for him too. It reopens old wounds, stirs buried shame, shakes the image he's carefully built of himself. So he tests, not out of malice, but out of instinct. He triggers your nervous system to see, do you stay grounded even when he doesn't show affection? For a woman who has known trauma bonds or toxic, narcissistic dynamics, this test feels like déjà vu. Her inner child, who learned that closeness always comes with uncertainty, wakes up. She doesn't just crave reassurance, she needs it to survive. And here begins the real test, not for him, but for her. Because in that moment when he withdraws, her mind becomes a battlefield. Did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Do I need to prove myself again? But what if his silence isn't rejection? What if it's a test of your emotional sovereignty? A woman with self-worth doesn't chase breadcrumbs. She doesn't lose herself in fear every time a man grows quiet. Instead, she stays rooted, not in his attention, but in her own emotional maturity. She knows. True feminine energy doesn't try to control the outcome. It creates space for truth to unfold. She doesn't demand closeness to soothe her fear. She stays present, grounded in her own value, and the man, consciously or not, observes. Not your reaction, but your regulation. Can you sit with uncertainty without betraying yourself? Do you choose dignity over desperation? Because here lies the paradox of emotional connection. It's not built through constant reassurance, but through observed resilience. He doesn't test to see if you'll stay. He tests to see if you can stand. And when you do, when you choose stillness over panic, he feels something new, something magnetic. A woman who doesn't beg for closeness, but to whom closeness naturally comes. But the test doesn't end there. The next challenge is quieter and even more intimate. It doesn't come through distance, but through boundaries. The line between affection and control, between flirtation and disrespect, begins to blur, and how you respond becomes the next mirror. You're laughing over dinner. It's playful, flirtatious, light, until it suddenly isn't. He says something, half jokingly, but it hits deep. A jab about your past. A comment about how intimidating you are. Or maybe it's physical. His hands linger a moment too long, take a step too far. You feel it. A boundary has been crossed, and suddenly that strange question arises. Was that just a joke or a test? This is the second test of a man in love, often calculated even if he's not aware of it. He wants to know something primal, something every masculine spirit seeks in a woman he might love. Can you protect yourself, even from me? He tests your boundaries not because he's cruel, but because he needs to feel the structure of your value system. Think of it like architecture. A man can't build an emotionally safe home with a woman whose walls collapse under the slightest pressure. He tests, because deep down, he respects what he cannot manipulate. This is where feminine energy is often misunderstood. It isn't passive. It's receptive, yes, but deeply alert. It senses subtle shifts, detects tremors beneath the charm. True feminine energy doesn't fight for control. It simply decides who gains access. And this is where many women, especially those recovering from toxic experiences, stand at an inner crossroads. The longing for connection collides with the need for self-protection. Do you laugh it off to keep the mood light, stay silent so you don't ruin things, or pause, breathe and set the boundary gracefully? Because it's not about the joke, it's about how quickly you abandon yourself just to keep the peace. It's about the price you pay to maintain harmony when your intuition is screaming. Women who grew up in emotionally unsafe environments often learned setting boundaries leads to punishment, so they stay quiet, out of love, but that silence sends a message: his respect is negotiable. A woman with self-worth understands every moment of discomfort is an opportunity to teach others how to treat her. She doesn't justify, she doesn't shout, she mirrors with calm intensity. I am not a playground for your emotional projections. And when she does that, when she quietly says, "That doesn't feel right," the energy shifts, the air changes, because suddenly he doesn't just see someone to desire, but someone worth rising for. Yet even after that boundary, a silence lingers, and he wonders, was that real or just performance? And that's why the next test goes deeper. He says little. He just observes. There's hardly anything as confusing as the silence after real vulnerability. One day he calls you magical, tells you how easy it is to talk to you, how special you are, and then he goes quiet, not forever, but long enough for you to start questioning everything, long enough for your mind to replay every word, every pause, every imagined mistake, a withdrawal that doesn't shout rejection, but quietly whispers uncertainty, and that whisper becomes deafening when clarity is absent. Why does he do that? Why does a man open up only to pull away? Here lies the psychological truth. When a man starts to bond, when real intimacy begins to take root, he often tests the stability of the container. He disappears, not out of cruelty, but to see how you handle the discomfort of uncertainty. Because for him, love isn't just connection, it's risk. The risk of being seen, the risk of being vulnerable, the risk of being needed. Such withdrawal activates all the abandoned parts in a woman who hasn't fully healed. It touches old wounds, moments when she was ignored, ghosted, or left without explanation. Her nervous system doesn't just register distance, it sounds the alarm, and if she isn't conscious, she starts chasing the connection, filling the silence, trying to fix something that might not even be broken. That's the trap, the psychological trigger. But for a woman grounded in her healed feminine energy, the silence becomes something else, a mirror, a sacred pause. She doesn't rush to fill the void. She is the space, grounded, responsive, still, not because she doesn't care, but because she knows emotional safety doesn't come from controlling others, but from self-leadership. A man in love wants to know, what do you do when he doesn't feed the connection? Do you crumble, confront, fall back into old patterns of over-adapting, or do you pause, regulate yourself, and keep living without proving your worth through his presence? He observes your self-control, your ability to remain whole, even when the relationship feels uncertain, and through this observation, something within him begins to shift. He doesn't just feel attraction anymore, he begins to feel safe with you, because a woman who doesn't fall apart in his absence is a woman he can trust with his presence. But safety has many layers, and sometimes the next test doesn't come through absence, but through intimacy. He opens up, and quietly, secretly, watches how you respond to his shadows, because even a strong man, when he loves, fears being truly seen. It shows in the sudden softness of his voice, when he talks about his father, when he admits he doesn't feel as confident as everyone thinks, or when he confesses that someone, perhaps before you, hurt him deeply, even broke him. These aren't mere confessions, they're psychological thresholds, little bridges he builds to create emotional connection, while simultaneously fearing that you might judge him, turn away, or pity him. For many men, especially those who've learned to equate vulnerability with weakness, emotional openness feels like standing naked in a storm. The armor doesn't fall to impress you, it falls to test you. He's silently asking, "Can you hold this without hurting me further?" And this is where feminine energy becomes more than softness. It becomes sacred presence, not reactive, not rescuing, but holding, with depth, with strength, with the quiet dignity of a woman who has learned not to flinch in the face of pain, neither her own nor his. But here it gets complicated. If you've spent your life healing others to feel worthy, if your self-image still depends on being needed, his vulnerability becomes a trap. You want to save him, guide him, redeem him, and so you slip from the role of lover into that of therapist. You carry what he must carry himself, and he feels that he doesn't pull away because he wasn't serious, but because he feels entangled. A woman with high self-worth doesn't drown in a man's wounds. She doesn't inflate herself to become his emotional crutch. She listens deeply, she provides safety, but she stays centered. She doesn't make his pain her project. She allows him to see himself through her acceptance, without losing herself in the process. In this space, something powerful happens. He realizes that love can coexist with boundaries, that emotional safety doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means taking responsibility without judgment, that he can reveal his darkness without being consumed by it, or by you. Yet now he carries a new tension in his chest. Was that real compassion, or just a performance? Is your constant or conditional? Will you still hold that space when his behavior isn't pleasant anymore? He doesn't ask these questions aloud, he observes, and the next time another man enters the room, or the waiter flirts a moment too long, he says nothing, but inwardly the next test has already begun, that there's a fleeting, almost invisible moment when a man watches how you interact with another man. It might be the barista who lingers, the friend who gives you a too charming compliment, or the co-worker whose name you mention a little too often, and in that moment his attention isn't on the other man, it's on you. Not because he's insecure, but because he's trying to answer a deeper, instinctive question. Are you faithful, even when you don't have to be? For a man who's truly becoming emotionally attached, especially one who's been betrayed before, or raised in unstable emotional environments, trust is never automatic. It has to be earned, not through words alone, but through micro-behaviors, through subtle signals, through patterns that whisper rather than shout. He isn't jealous in a childish way. He's assessing your inner alignment. Where does your attention go when the world flirts with your worth? It's not about possession, it's about orientation. Does your feminine energy attract attention and then calmly return to him? Not out of duty, but out of conscious choice. And here things become even more layered. If you've been shaped by trauma, especially by fear of abandonment, you might unconsciously seek external validation to feel yourself. You flirt without realizing it. You bring up past relationships, then not to compare, but to reassure yourself that you're still desirable. These are psychological defense mechanisms born from experiences where you were never fully chosen, and no matter how much you fall in love with this new man, a part of you may still be testing. Am I enough? Am I seen? Do I still have control if this doesn't work out? And he senses it, not always clearly, but intuitively, in your tone, in the glance that lingers a moment too long on another man, in the way you mention your ex as if he were a reference point. He feels when you're divided inside, between the longing for connection and the inner need for a backup plan. And if he's a man with depth, if he's truly developing feelings, it unsettles him. A woman with high self-worth, rooted in her healed feminine energy, doesn't perform loyalty. She embodies it, not from fear, not from lack, but because her energy is grounded. She doesn't dim her light, but she also doesn't waste her intimacy as a form of power. She's magnetic precisely because she doesn't use attention as currency. She knows her value is not up for auction, and when she holds that posture, graceful, grounded, unmistakably loyal, he feels something rare. Emotional safety, the kind that makes a man lay down his armor because he no longer fears being just a placeholder for her insecurity. But trust doesn't form in a single moment. So now he does something subtler, something deeper than mere observation. He challenges your beliefs. He teases, not to provoke, but to test whether your strength is real or just a facade. It starts as a playful debate. You say you believe in therapy, and he smirks. Isn't that just modern self-help hype? You mention your passion project, and he asks whether you might be using it to hide from intimacy. It's not openly hostile, but the tension in the room rises, or a quiet provocation, and beneath it all the question, do you truly believe what you say? Or do you fold when your convictions are tested? A man who's truly falling in love doesn't just want to know your softness, he wants to feel your structure. He wants to sense the walls that won't crumble when he leans against them. Often this isn't conscious, it's instinctive. When he's serious, he tests the architecture of your mind. He wants to know, do you hold these beliefs to feel powerful, or because you've earned them through thought, experience, and pain? Here lies the paradox. Many women, especially those with toxic relationship histories, learned to be pleasing in order to survive. Disagreement meant danger, speaking the truth meant conflict. So they censored themselves to avoid rejection, mistaking compliance for connection, and when a man challenges them, they retreat, smile nervously, change the subject. But a healed woman doesn't prove her strength through resistance, nor does she submit to be liked. She meets the moment with presence, not to win, but to remain in her clarity. Feminine energy at this level is not only nurturing, it's discerning. It radiates a calm, embodied, this is who I am, not triggered, not dependent on approval. This woman doesn't crumble when a man questions her goals. She leans in, not to justify herself, but to reveal the depth behind her direction. And in doing so, she disarms something in him, because he's not used to being received that way. Most people either defend themselves, boom, or back down, but she mirrors, she reflects, she thinks, she answers from within, not from fear. And in that moment, he realizes this woman doesn't need approval to feel loved. She knows herself well enough to be loved as she is, and yet he still wonders, not out of mistrust, but from genuine curiosity, is her strength constant or only situational? Does she stay upright when he's not kind, when he's off balance, when closeness becomes complicated? The next test then doesn't come through words, but through patterns, through familiar dysfunctions that resurface out of nowhere, through what both of them fear most, recognition. You think you're finally safe. This man is different. He listens, he's present, he cares. And just when your nervous system begins to relax, just when you start to lower your walls, something unsettling happens. Nothing big, no drama, but the small signs, sudden emotional distance, a different tone, a sarcastic remark that stings a little, and deep inside, something ancient whispers, this feels familiar and dangerous. That's the paradox of trauma healing. Even when you start attracting healthier men, a part of you still waits for pain. And sometimes, consciously or not, the man before you begins to mirror the very patterns you thought you had escaped. But here's an insight few talk about. It's not always a warning sign. Sometimes it's a test, not just for him, but for you. When a man begins to fall in love, he doesn't just see who you are, he senses who you were. And if he's walked through his own storms, if he carries his own unconscious wounds, there's a chance he'll replay familiar emotional dynamics. Maybe he withdraws like your avoidant ex. Maybe he reacts impulsively like the father you could never please, not to hurt you, but because love activates the shadow. In real emotional intimacy, the psyche pulls old patterns to the surface to see if they still hold power. That is the hidden battlefield of intimacy. And the man, often without realizing it, observes, how do you respond when he unintentionally becomes a mirror of your past? Do you regress? Lose your voice? Try to fix, soothe, or save him? It's not a game. It's your nervous system's memory in motion. Even the strongest woman can become that frightened little girl again when the right trigger is hit. But this is where your growth shows, not in perfection, but in awareness. When you notice the old pattern repeating and choose not to replay it, this is what sets a woman of high self-worth apart. Not that she avoids difficult relationships, but that she interrupts the inheritance. She refuses to abandon herself just because someone else does. She names what hurts, without making it the other person's responsibility to fix it. And when she does that, something shifts in him too. He realizes you're not expecting perfection, only presence. And even more, you don't need him to protect you from your past. You've already begun doing that yourself. Yet one final question remains for him. Deep beneath all your strength and self-awareness, is she only strong when she's loved, or can she walk away when love becomes pain? And so, silently, he presses one last time at the edge, not to see if you'll stay, but to see if you know when it's time to go. There's a certain silence in the room that speaks louder than words. He's there, but not really. The tenderness has dulled, the conversations crumble, the promises have become patterns, and you feel the weight of staying and the cost of leaving. Still, a part of you holds on. Not because you can't see the change, but because you hope he'll change back. You ask yourself, is he just confused, or is this the moment I have to prove I'm enough? That is the last, and perhaps the most brutal, test a man gives, usually without knowing it. He pulls away, not with anger but with indifference. He stops doing the little things that made you feel seen. And, deep inside, he's not waiting out of cruelty. He's observing, will you abandon yourself to hold on to him? This is where so many women break, especially those still healing from narcissistic dynamics where love had to be earned through self-denial. They settle for crumbs and call it patience. They excuse emotional absence and call it compassion. But in truth, it's an identity loss disguised as devotion. In the psychology of love, this moment matters more than any romantic gesture, because here femininity is tested at its core, not by how much she can give, but by how much loss she can endure without losing herself. Here the woman of true worth rises, not because she's cold, but because she's clear. Feminine energy doesn't just attract, it discerns. She doesn't chase the man who's walking away, she blesses him silently and walks toward the light of her own becoming. And this doesn't come from ego, but from healing, from the sacred remembering that you don't have to bleed to be loved. But even when she leaves, even when she chooses herself, the pain remains, because goodbyes built on hope hurt differently. And the man, if he was ever sincere, feels the shift. He realizes this woman didn't test him with games. She was ready to love him fully, but not ready to lose herself again in the process. And so he's left with the echo of the one woman who neither begged, nor performed, nor punished, but simply walked away when her inner peace was no longer safe in his presence. And that echo doesn't fade, because it wasn't just her leaving, it was proof of her worth. And the silent warning, if he ever wants to keep a woman like her, he'll have to stop testing and start showing up. And that's what I want you to remember. When a man tests you, it's not a game, it's an invitation to rise, to hold your standards, to be the woman you became through all that pain. Tell me in the comments, have you experienced something like this in your life? If this message helped you see things more clearly, give it a like, share it, or subscribe for more empowering insights on healing, self-worth, and feminine strength. And let me know which topics you'd like to see next. I want to hear from you.